I'm Dr. TediAnne Hasapopoulos. I'm a faculty member of Bethel Seminary and Graduate School. This video is to help us better understand ourselves, in particular, where our thinking and our feeling biases may be sourced. Each of us has a worldview, a conceptual organizing structure that allows us to make sense of our world and the events we experience. While our worldview impacts how we perceive all that we experience, for most people, that worldview is hidden. By hidden, I mean that our worldview operates in the realm of our unconscious mind. Our worldview is just there, and its assumptions are the filters through which we judge what we are experiencing, what others are doing, and what we do. But our worldview and its impact doesn't need to remain hidden, implicitly impacting our perceptions and our reactions. Our worldviews can be examined. We can express the assumptions that underlie our worldviews. We can assess the validity of those assumptions in accordance with what we believe about reality and knowledge. And we can adjust our worldview in light of our examination. Socrates has been quoted as saying, "A life unexamined is not worth living." Now, I don't know that I would go that far, but I truly believe that the stability of our leadership is dependent on how carefully we have examined our worldview. That's because we lead from our worldview implicitly or explicitly. Allow me to help you make explicit the components of your worldview so that you can lead from deeper knowing of yourself. Philosophy. It sounds daunting, aloof, ivory tower, far from the everyday practices of leadership. Well, perhaps, but perhaps not. When philosophy is stripped away of long dissertations and academic language, you find that it's an examination into a universal notion. Philosophy is simply the study of a person's perception of the ultimate. What does that person ascribe as the beginning? What is the first cause? What is the highest authority to whom one would submit oneself? Simply put, philosophy explores two basic concepts, truth and knowledge. Every leader, especially those who aspire to values-based leadership, must come to terms with what he or she has determined is truth, the first cause, the ultimate. Why? Because this is the foundation of our value systems. Who can be a values-based leader without examining one's values system? And each organizational leader must come to terms with how he or she knows what is known about truth. I know this sounds circular, and in some sense it is. But this lecture will help you understand truth and knowledge matter greatly as each leader defines a personal values system from which to lead. In John's account of the Passion of Jesus, he tells us of how the jaded Pilate understood that in dealing with Jesus, the stakes were incredibly high. The buzz around Jerusalem was that Jesus was the Messiah. That was the Hebrew word, or the Christ. That's the Greek word. And both those words mean the one who was expected to be as a God and rule Israel. Pilate asked Jesus point blank, "Are you the king of the Jews?" They go back and forth in exchange. It was a philosophical discussion. And finally, Pilate throws up his hands and declares in question form, "What is truth?" Can you hear Pilate's skepticism in that question? What if Jesus really was a God or a being sent from God? Should Pilate seek to discern the answer to this question? However, Pilate has failed to lead. In refusing to seek truth, he has also refused to fit himself for leadership. So consider the proverb. Wise men store up knowledge, but the mouth of a fool invites ruin. The biblical idea of fool is not someone who's silly or stupid. Rather, the Hebrew word behind this English term means one who is morally corrupt. Knowledge is a tool to fortify our ability to be morally wise. So why study philosophy? It's simply the examination of what is truth and by what knowledge do we ascertain truth? So now let's add the philosophical terminology. Ontology is the understanding of what is. As Pilate asked the question, what is truth? He was seeking an answer to the ancient question of ontology. As we struggle with ontological questions, we seek to discern reality. Epistemology is the study of how we come to know what we know. As we examine the phenomena called knowledge, we ask questions such as, what can be known? What kinds of knowledge are there? How can you know something? And where does knowledge come from? Ontology explores the most fundamental assumptions one holds regarding reality. Those assumptions provide the foundation on which all of one's understanding is predicated. This is because ontology examines what we hold as our assumptions about being. How do we describe our existence? Do we agree with Descartes, who declared, I think, therefore I am? Or do we accept the postmodern notion that my reality is not your reality? How could I determine that Descartes' thought processes are akin to mine? How can I determine if you and I share a reality? Well, you can't do either. Thus, the ontological position you operate under is an assumption. Your assumption regarding reality will center on what you hold as first cause. First cause is one's understanding of what has brought reality into existence. Thus, ontology and theology are fully intertwined. While it might sound quite narrow-minded, there are really only 3 ontological vantage points, and these vantage points are mutually exclusive. A person cannot simultaneously hold to more than one at a time. Either a person assumes reality is defined by naturalism understanding, or relative understanding, or theism understanding. The next few slides unpack what each of these terms contain in their meaning. We'll examine these philosophical views via 3 traits. What does this ontology claim is truth? To what authority do holders of that view ascribe and submit? And how does this ontological view impact the praxis or practices of everyday life? Now, keep in mind that these are the most basic categories that we can reduce the complex ideas that answer the question of what is reality. But this is the place to begin. Naturalism is the ontological view that contends that all existence is limited to objective reality. By objective, we mean able to sense via the 5 human senses of touch, smell, sight, taste, and hearing. Therefore, to the naturalists, reality is only comprised of the physical material world. Any concepts that imply a spiritual reality must be rejected, as these concepts cannot be verified by objective observation. Note that we are already starting to make epistemological statements about what we know or can know. That is because one's ontology and epistemology are fully enmeshed. What a person assumes is reality will either be informed by what that person allows for knowledge or what is being allowed as a source of knowledge will be determined by what one believes are the boundaries of reality. Relativism is an ontology that begins with the assumptions of naturalism, but then takes a turn that sends this view of reality in a quite different direction. While the naturalist claims objectivism as the basis of reality, the relativist claims subjectivism as the basis of reality. Relativism is an ontological view that contends that what is observable is not really observable in any fashion that can be common to 2 individuals. Because, 1, our minds are confined to ourselves and our thinking is utterly interior to the person. And 2, our life experiences are utterly idiosyncratic, meaning no other person can share ever exactly what a person experiences. Reality must be defined as perceptions of reality, real? Real reality can never be experienced objectively because all that we experience is in the context of our subjective inner processing. Therefore, existence and truth are entirely subjective matters and have been constructed individually by each person as a function of the language, the culture, and the idiosyncratic experiences that that person has had. Why the focus on language and culture, you might ask? Do you think in words? Well, of course you do. And where do words come from? Your family. How did your family learn to use those words and ascribe meaning to the sounds of the words? Through the language spoken by the family. And where did that language come from? The culture of the people group that speaks that language. The relativist puts much emphasis on the impact of culture, often very micro-cultural contexts, in the development of a person's ontological views. Therefore, my reality cannot be your reality, though there are some concepts that might overlap between us. However, the overlap becomes less and less as the cultures in which we were raised differ. While my subjective perception of reality may be fairly similar to another white American female raised in rural Iowa and educated in Midwestern United States, I can't expect my perception of reality to overlap much with a Black African male raised in urban Tanzania and educated at Oxford. And now to theism. Theism is the ontological view that contends that existence is real in both the physical and the spiritual realms. Differing from relativism, the theist believes that existence is not a fully individual construction. Rather, the theist believes that there is an objective reality that transcends any human being's experience. Theism is a very diverse basket of ontological views. Within it are all the major world religions, and any view that assumes that a spiritual reality can be experienced objectively because that reality breaks into the human experience. So what do each of these ontological views accept as the authoritative determination for informing humans regarding what is real? Well, the naturalist seeks the basis of authority. That person will look to science to be the final say in any debate. Faith is placed in science's ability to discover anything that is real given enough time and resources. That, of course, is a leap of faith. It requires the assumption that all that is real is observable in the physical sense. Such persons will contend that God is not, as the very concept of God suggests that this being exists outside the realm of physical existence, and since no other realm exists, God can't exist. Without an authoritative voice beyond the physical, material, human condition, only science is available to determine what is real. This is called scientism, as in ism, as in a faith system, as in Hinduism, Judaism, Catholicism, atheism. The naturalist is putting faith in science as the authority for truth. Now note, this is not the same as being scientific. One can hold to other ontological views and be very diligent in employing scientific methods and thought when inquiring about the physical realm of existence. It's important that we don't confuse naturalism as the ontological view with being scientific. Being scientific is using strict scientific methods to examine the physical world. There are many theists, relativists, and naturalists who employ scientific methods with excellence. And there are many theists, relativists, and naturalists that are sloppy in employing scientific methods. And now let's turn to the relativist. The relativist must center authority in the person, in the self. Why? Because if every other person's reality is unknowable, then how could authority be sourced from outside the self? If my truth is my truth and your truth is your truth, then obviously I am my own authority with regards to truth. However, the relativist will contend that our perceptions of truth have been manipulated by the culture and the language we have been raised within. My culture is mediated by the language of my culture. And even at a more micro level, the range of meaning that words hold in my microculture. And these have participated in the construction of my subjective conception of truth. Thus, societal power holders have much to do with creating truth. And the theist? This person places authority in a transcendent other, whatever is the divine. And it is the divine choosing to break into the human condition that allows humans to even perceive the divine exists. Now, given these positions regarding truth and authority, how do each of these ontological views play out in the practice of everyday living? The naturalist must reject any concept that necessitates a divine hand. Thus, creation cannot be a function of some divine power that brought reality into existence. This is why those who hold to naturalism, all as an ontological view, grasp so tightly to the theory of macroevolution. Please don't confuse macroevolution with microevolution. Microevolution contends that creatures adapt within the boundaries of its species to better survive changing environments. There is plenty of physical evidence that this is so. Macroevolution is a quite different theory. It contends that existence is sourced from some cosmic event that happened by chance and through billions of years organized into complex creature systems that we now call humans. And frankly, there is precious little physical evidence that this is so. But that is another lecture. The point here is that for the naturalist, the only explanation for creation is that of chance. For if not chance, then creation must have been sourced from a force that exists outside the physical realm. And such a force can't fit this ontological assumption. In what ways is this circular reasoning? Now, for the relativist, any concept that would be conceived as universally applicable to all humans must be rejected. Why? Because this would assume that universal reality would apply to me, and that can't be so. That's because my reality is my reality. Now, give some thought to this self-oriented concept of reality. Any concept of God must be ultimately rejected as no more than an imagined construct that suits the given individual's need for such a psychologically soothing notion. Can you see how the idea of I have my God and you have your God requires that all views of God must be myth? Either there is an ontological reality that God is and is outside the human condition, or there is no God at all. Therefore, one can rightly and logically say, my perception of God is my reality, and your perception of God is your reality. But that statement says nothing about what God might actually be without some intervention by the real God. It's quite another matter for the theist. This person allows the notion that there is the divine, and this divine transcends or is outside human existence. The divine exists whether or not humans exist, because the divine is. Thus, the theist accepts concepts from science and from divine revelation to shed light on reality. One can see how your ontological view then controls your understanding of epistemology. If you have an a priori decision against the spiritual world, you will refuse to acknowledge the spiritual world and learn from it. If you've made a decision that existence is subjective and dependent solely on language, culture, you will refuse to accept that I may know something from outside myself that is applicable to you. If you've made an a priori decision against universal truth concepts that apply to all humanity, you will refuse to apply learning from divine revelation to all humans. One's ontology determines what one is willing to know. So, what are some of the epistemological views? How do people describe knowledge and how humans know what they know? It shouldn't be any surprise that the three major views are in lockstep with these three ontological views. These three theories of knowing are scientism, relativism, and theism. Let's consider these views as applied to the human ability to know about the divine. Why might this matter in everyday life? Because if God is, then there is a moral component to who he is, and that moral component has implications for ethics, beyond our personal ethics and into our professional ethics. Let's cut to the core notion that divides these three basic views of knowing, of epistemology. Let's apply it to the divine. How do humans know anything about the divine? Let's begin with scientism, which is the epistemological outworking of naturalism. Note the definition on this slide. The divine cannot exist because, by definition, it exists in the supernatural realm, which cannot exist because it can't be observed or known. Knowing about the divine is completely shut out. It's shut out as an option, as an a priori decision has been made that the divine does not exist. There is nothing to know. And how does relativism impact one's view of knowing? While a given individual may have some experience or conception of the divine, it cannot be truly shared knowledge. And therefore, it is not an external or transcendent reality. Rather, what is perceived as divine is really the subjective stuff of myth and legend. Humans are communal creatures that need concepts that unify their communities so that they can survive in numbers. Concepts such as the divine provide humans with a commonality around which to organize and be unified. For the theist, epistemology regarding the divine is other-dependent. The divine is known to exist because the divine has chosen to make itself known. We know about God because God has revealed himself. And God endowed humans with the reasoning capacity to discern God's reality. For the theist, knowledge is greatly expanded beyond the boundaries of human physical experience. The theist accepts that every human has the capacity and the opportunity to experience a knowing of existence that taps into a realm that is not known by the five senses. Rather, there is existence that is known through one's spirit and processed through one's mind to allow the person to articulate that knowing. It is that which we just know in our knower. The three dominant views regarding theism have their roots in God's revelation to Abraham 4,000 years ago. This is not the place to get into the differing views of what happened between God and humanity since Abraham, but I find it fascinating that many theists root their understanding of God and God's relationship to humans in the relationship with one person, Abraham. What is the likelihood that this revelation is simply a legend or a myth when it's held by billions of people in the 21st century? And it has been upheld and held by countless billions of people for 4,000 years.